The first red flag didn't come from a phone call in the middle of a storm. It came from a spreadsheet. I want you to understand that, because everything that happened afterward, the badge I flashed at a bank manager, the federal agent standing behind me, the sound of my sister screaming my name across a parking lot, all of it started with a routine form I have filled out every 5 years since I was 23 years old. A financial disclosure. My name is Captain Emily Hart. I am an intelligence officer in the United States Air Force. I have spent 11 years reading other people's patterns for a living. Troop movements, supply chains, the small inconsistencies that tell you someone is lying before they ever open their mouth. I have briefed generals. I have flagged threats that never made the news because we caught them in time. None of that prepared me for the moment I had to use those same skills on my own family. My father was the one who taught me to look for patterns in the first place, long before the Air Force ever did. He was a Vietnam-era veteran, a quiet man who read every document twice and signed nothing on the first read. And he used to tell me, when I was young and impatient, that most lies aren't told out loud. Most lies are told through omission, the thing a person doesn't mention, the question they answer with a different question, the paperwork they hand you at exactly the moment you're too tired to read it carefully. He died 2 years before any of this began, of a heart that had simply worked hard for too long. And the last thing he asked me from a hospital bed was to look after your mother, Em, not your sister, your mother. I told him I would, and then I got on a plane back to base 3 days after the funeral, because that's what the job required. And I let myself believe that because Rachel lived 20 minutes from Mom and I lived 1,000 miles away, the promise had somehow transferred to her instead. It hadn't. It was mine. I just didn't understand that yet. This is the story of how a debt that wasn't mine led me to a house I grew up in, to a woman in a wheelchair who used to run 5 miles every morning, and to the 2 people who called themselves her caretakers while they were quietly signing her life away. I'm going to tell it the way I was trained to tell everything, in order, with evidence. It started on a Tuesday, in a windowless room on base that always smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax. Every officer with a security clearance goes through a periodic reinvestigation, a deep look at your finances, your associations, anything that could make you vulnerable to compromise. Debt is one of the first things they check, because debt is leverage. Debt is how foreign intelligence services recruit people. Nobody sells out their country for ideology anymore. They sell out because they're drowning and someone offers them a life raft. I had never had a problem with mine. My credit was clean, my accounts were boring. That was the point. The security officer running my review, a soft-spoken master sergeant named Alvarez, slid a printed report across the table and turned it toward me. Captain, before we finish, I need you to explain this. I looked down. A credit inquiry. A loan. $61,000. Originated 8 months earlier. Co-signed under my social security number and a second name I recognized immediately. Margaret Hart. My mother. That's not mine, I said. I've never taken out a loan in my life. Alvarez didn't blink. He'd heard that sentence before, probably from people who were lying. The lender has you listed as co-borrower. Address on file is a house in Ohio. My mother's house. The house my father built a porch onto with his own hands the summer before he retired. The house that had been paid off in full for 6 years, because my father spent the last decade of his life making sure my mother would never owe anyone anything after he was gone. I need copies of everything you have, I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected. Training does that. It puts a wall between the part of you that's screaming and the part of you that still has to function. That's not something I can release without your written request going through the loan servicer, Alvarez said. But Captain, for what it's worth, this is exactly the kind of thing we tell people to report immediately. Somebody may be using your identity. I sat there for a moment, doing the thing I do best. Not panicking, not yet, just cataloging. A loan I never signed. My mother's address. My mother's name. And a total that was almost exactly what her house had once been worth in equity. I walked out of that windowless room and called my mother from the parking lot before I even reached my car. She picked up on the 6th ring, which was unusual. My mother has answered every call from me on the 2nd ring since I was 19 years old and shipped out for the first time. She used to joke that she kept the phone in her apron pocket just for me. "Hello?" Her voice sounded thick, slow, like she was speaking through wet cotton. "Mom, it's me." A long pause. Too long. "Emily?" "Yes, Mom, it's Emily." I tried to keep my tone light. "You sound tired. Did I wake you up?" "I don't—" Another pause. I could hear something shuffling in the background. A chair maybe, or a walker. "I don't know what time it is." "Mom, it's 2 in the afternoon." "Is it?" She laughed, but it wasn't her laugh. It was thin and far away, like a recording of her laugh played through a bad speaker. "Rachel takes care of all that now. The clocks and the things." My stomach tightened at my sister's name, though I couldn't have told you why yet. Rachel had moved in to help 2 years earlier, right after Dad's funeral, and I had been grateful, genuinely grateful. I was stationed 1,000 miles away with a job that didn't let me take leave whenever I wanted, and my sister had stepped up. That's the story I had told myself for 2 years. "Mom, did you take out a loan recently? On the house?" Silence. "Mom?" "Rachel handles the paperwork," she said finally. "There's so much paperwork now, since your father." "What kind of paperwork?" "I don't remember, sweetheart. I get so tired in the afternoons." That sentence, "I get so tired in the afternoons," would come back to me 100 times over the following weeks. At the time, it sounded like nothing, an old woman's ordinary complaint. It would take me 11 more days to understand it was a symptom, not a personality trait. "Mom, I'm going to call Rachel, okay? I love you. Get some rest." "I love you too, Emily. Tell them—" She stopped. "Tell who what, Mom?" "Nothing. Never mind. I forgot what I was going to say." I stood in that parking lot for a long time after we hung up, staring at nothing, running the conversation back the way I'd run back a garbled radio transmission, looking for the signal underneath the static. Then I called my sister. Rachel answered on the first ring, which told me she had her phone in her hand already, which told me she had been expecting someone might call. Hey, what's up?" Bright. Too bright. My sister has always been a warm person, but there's warm and there's performed, and after 11 years of watching people lie to my face for a living, I know the difference in my sleep. "I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer," I said. "Did Mom take out a loan on the house?" The pause before she answered was exactly 1 second too long. "Where did you hear that?" That's not an answer. It's... Okay, yes, there was some refinancing. Grant helped set it up. The house needed work. The roof was leaking, and honestly, Mom's care is getting expensive. You have no idea what home health aides cost these days. My name is on it. Another pause. What? The loan. It has my social security number on it as a cosigner. I found out today during a background investigation for my clearance, Rachel. Federal paperwork. Do you understand what that means? That has to be a mistake, a clerical error. I'll call the lender tomorrow and get it straightened out, I promise. How is Mom? The subject change caught her off guard. What? How is Mom doing? Right now, today? She's fine. She's tired a lot. The doctor says it's normal for her age. She didn't know what time it was, Rachel. She sounded drugged. She's not drugged, Em. God, don't say things like that. She's 74. She takes medication for her blood pressure and her anxiety. That's it. What medication? Who prescribed it? I'm not doing this over the phone. You're overreacting because you're far away and you feel guilty. And instead of dealing with that, you're interrogating me like I'm a criminal. There it was. The move I'd watched 100 hostile interview subjects make. Redirect the accusation into an attack on the accuser's character. It's a good tactic. It works on people who love you because it makes the conversation about their guilt instead of your evidence. It has never worked on me professionally. This was the first time I felt it land on me personally, and I understood in that instant exactly how effective it must have been on my mother for the last 2 years. I'm coming home, I said. You don't need to do that. I'm putting in for emergency leave tonight. I hung up. I want to tell you what it's like to sit across from your commanding officer, and try to explain in a controlled professional voice that you need emergency leave because you think your sister might be stealing from your elderly mother. I got through about 4 sentences before my voice cracked, and my commander, a colonel who had flown combat missions and did not startle easily, looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Captain, take the leave. Take as much as you need. And Hart, if you need anything from this office, anything at all, you call me directly." I didn't know yet how much I'd need that offer. I flew out the next morning, 31 hours from the moment I saw that spreadsheet to the moment my rental car pulled into my mother's driveway. 11 years of training had taught me to move fast without moving carelessly, to gather information before I acted, and every professional instinct in my body was screaming at me to slow down, to build a case first. But I am also a daughter, and my mother's voice on that phone call had not let go of me for one single mile of that drive. The house looked the same from the outside. White siding, my father's porch, the maple tree he planted the year I was born, now taller than the roofline. It looked like nothing was wrong, which is exactly how these things are designed to look. I let myself in with my old key. Rachel hadn't changed the locks, which I noted, filed away, because it told me she wasn't expecting an intrusion, which meant she wasn't expecting me to know enough to look for one. The living room was dim, curtains drawn in the middle of the afternoon, and in my father's old recliner, wrapped in a blanket despite the mild weather, sat my mother. She was smaller than I remembered, not just thinner, smaller, folded in on herself, the way people get when something has been slowly draining the air out of them for a long time. Her eyes were open but unfocused, fixed somewhere past the muted television. "Mom?" It took her almost 4 full seconds to turn her head toward me. When she did, her eyes were glossy, and it took another moment for recognition to surface behind them, like something rising slowly through murky water. "Emily?" Her voice was a whisper. "Is that really you?" "It's me, Mom." I knelt in front of the chair and took her hands. They were cold. "I'm here." She started to cry, silently, her shoulders shaking with almost no sound coming out, like she'd forgotten how to cry out loud, or had been taught not to. "I didn't think anyone was coming," she said. "I'm here now. They said you were too busy." I felt something go very still and very cold inside my chest, the exact feeling I get in a briefing room when a pattern I've been circling for an hour suddenly resolves into a shape. "Who said that, Mom?" "Rachel." "And the nurse." "What nurse?" Before she could answer, I heard the front door open behind me, and a voice I didn't recognize said, "Oh, can I help you?" I turned to find a woman standing in the doorway to the kitchen, mid-40s, wearing pale blue scrubs that looked purchased rather than issued, holding a small zippered case in one hand. She had the practiced, professionally soft expression of someone who does this, greets strangers in other people's homes, often enough to have a script for it. "I'm Emily, Margaret's daughter." Something flickered behind her eyes, there and gone in under a second, but I've spent 11 years learning to catch exactly that kind of flicker. "Denise," she said, extending a hand I did not take. "I'm your mom's caregiver. Rachel didn't mention you were coming." "Rachel didn't know," I said. "What agency are you with?" "I'm independent, private hire. It's more personal that way. Your mom prefers it." "What's in the case?" Denise's smile tightened by perhaps a millimeter. "Just her afternoon medication, blood pressure, and something to help with her anxiety. Nothing unusual. I'd like to see it. I really shouldn't hand out medical information to someone who isn't listed as a... I'm her daughter, and I have medical power of attorney backup authorization on file with her physician," I said, which was true, from years earlier, before any of this began, back when durable power of attorney was something we set up as a formality, never imagining it would matter. "I'd like to see what you're giving my mother." Denise's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought she'd refuse outright. Then she opened the case and turned it toward me, just enough, just briefly. 2 amber pill bottles and a small glass vial with a rubber stopper top, plus 2 capped syringes in a side sleeve. Syringes. For blood pressure medication? That's an injectable, I said. What is it? A mild sedative. For her anxiety. Doctor's orders. Which doctor? Dr. Feldman. I would later spend an evening confirming that no physician named Feldman was licensed in that county, or the 2 counties beside it. I'll take it from here today, I said, and reached for the case. Denise pulled it back half an inch, an instinctive, unthinking motion, the kind you can't train out of someone because it's not a decision, it's a reflex. The reflex of someone protecting something they know they shouldn't have. Then she seemed to remember herself and handed it over with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. Rachel's going to want to know you're here, she said, and there was something almost like a threat folded into the pleasant delivery. Good, I said. I want to talk to Rachel too. Denise left 20 minutes later, telling my mother she'd see her tomorrow in a tone that made my skin crawl, like she was speaking to a child or a patient or someone she expected to have no memory of the conversation by morning. I walked her to her car, a 10-year-old sedan with a bumper sticker for a tanning salon 2 towns over, and memorized the plate before she pulled away. Old habits. Good habits, it turned out. I spent that first evening doing 3 things I had been trained to do before I ever let myself feel anything about what I was finding. I observed, I documented, and I did not confront anyone with information I hadn't verified yet. I made my mother tea. I sat with her while the fog behind her eyes slowly, incompletely lifted, the way a tide goes out but never all the way. I asked her simple questions and wrote down her answers, not because I distrusted her, but because I needed a record of exactly what she remembered and what she didn't, time-stamped, in case anyone later suggested I was exaggerating. Mom, do you remember signing any papers recently about the house? She frowned, the effort of concentration visible on her face, like she was trying to see through fog. Grant had me sign something, at the kitchen table. He said it was for insurance. What kind of insurance? Your father's policy. He said it needed to be updated, renewed. My father's life insurance policy had paid out in full 2 years earlier, a fact I remembered clearly because I had helped my mother deposit the check myself, sitting beside her at the same kitchen table, watching her cry with relief that she would never have to worry about money for the rest of her life. Mom, do you remember how much money was in your accounts, before and now? Rachel handles the money now. I get confused with numbers lately. Since when? She thought about it, longer than the question should have required. Since the medication started, I think. I set down my pen. What medication, Mom? Tell me exactly what Denise gives you. A little shot, in the morning and sometimes at night, for my nerves. I don't like it, Emily. It makes everything feel far away, like I'm watching my life through water. I have interviewed detainees who described interrogation with less clinical accuracy than my 74-year-old mother just used to describe what was happening to her own mind. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the medication case Denise had left behind, because in her hurry to get away from me, she'd forgotten it, a mistake that would matter more than she could have known. And I photographed every label, every lot number, every unmarked vial. I found her small bag of personal items shoved into a hallway closet where a temporary caregiver had no business storing anything. And inside a zippered inner pocket, I found something that made my hands go very still. A folded printout. A criminal background check, the kind private investigators run, for a woman named Denise Voss. Except that wasn't the name on the printout. The printout was for a Denise Alcott. Same date of birth, same face in the attached photograph. 2 prior convictions for theft from a vulnerable adult, in a different state, under her maiden name. A civil judgment for elder financial exploitation that had cost her a nursing license she never should have held in the first place, because the report noted, in flat administrative language, that her license had been revoked 7 years earlier. She wasn't an unlicensed caregiver working outside the system by accident. She was unlicensed because the system had already thrown her out of it once. And somebody in my family had hired her anyway. I was still sitting at the kitchen table at 11 that night, photographs of the printout spread across the wood surface, when headlights swept across the living room wall. Grant's truck. I had maybe 40 seconds. I swept the papers into a folder, slid the folder into my bag under the table, and had a cup of tea in front of me and a magazine open to a random page by the time the front door opened. "Em," Grant stood in the doorway, keys still in his hand, doing a poor job of looking casual. "Didn't know you were still up." "Couldn't sleep, jet lag." I kept my voice light, bored, the voice of someone with nothing on her mind but tea. "Mom's asleep. Denise came by earlier." "Yeah, she mentioned you two met." Something in the way he said it was testing the water, fishing to see how much I'd ask, how much I already suspected. "She's good with your mom, real gentle." "She left her medication case here," I said, watching his face carefully. "I put it in the hall closet." I watched him catalog that information, that I'd had my hands on the case, that I might have looked inside it, and I watched him decide, visibly, not to ask, because asking would have meant admitting there was something in it worth asking about. He paused at the stairs, not quite looking at me. "Your mother's going to outlive all of us, Em. Somebody has to think about what's left when she's gone." Then he went up, like he'd said something reasonable, and I sat at that table for another 10 minutes, with my heart hammering in a way it hadn't during 2 actual deployments, because I had just understood something important. They would notice if I moved too fast. From that point forward, everything I did in that house, I did like I was running an operation inside hostile territory, because in every way that mattered, I was. By morning, I had made a decision that 11 years of military training had prepared me for better than any instinct I might otherwise have followed. I was not going to confront my sister with accusations. I was going to build a case, the way I build every case. Quietly, methodically, and completely, before the subject of the investigation knows they're being investigated. I called an old friend from my commissioning program, a former Air Force JAG officer who now worked financial crimes for the FBI's field office 2 states over. His name was Marcus Webb, and when I told him what I'd found, he didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, he asked one question. "Is your mother safe right now, physically, today?" "Yes, I'm with her." "Then don't confront anyone. Don't tip your hand. Document everything and get it to me. If this is what it sounds like, unlicensed medical administration, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, possible fraud involving federal financial systems, since it sounds like the mortgage and the insurance both moved through federally regulated institutions, this becomes a federal matter fast, but we need the pattern, not just the pieces." Patterns. It was the word my instructors had drilled into me a decade earlier, and it was the word that would carry me through the next 3 weeks. So, I started building one. Patricia Nguyen got the financial records moving within a day of my call. 3 years of accounts, every transaction, through the proper legal channels. The calm, unshakable patience of a woman who had seen every version of this crime and stopped being surprised by any of it a long time ago. I chased the medical side myself. I cross-referenced every prescription my mother had been given in the past 2 years against the actual physicians who supposedly wrote them. Dr. Feldman still didn't exist, exactly like I'd suspected. Half the prescriptions Denise Foss administered were written under a name that traced back to an expired medical license belonging to a retired physician in another state, a license number that had simply been copied onto pharmacy paperwork, the way you'd copy a password you found on a sticky note. Then I remembered the cameras. My father's old Porch-cameras, the small off-brand kind, installed years earlier back when he was worried about package theft. Cameras nobody had thought to remove because nobody remembered they were still recording, to a cloud account under his old email address, an email address I still had access to because I was the one who'd helped him set it up. I logged in that night not knowing what I'd find. 91 days of footage. I watched all of it in long, methodical sessions, the same way I would review satellite imagery for anomalies, not looking for one dramatic moment, but for a pattern across time. I found it. Every morning, 7:15, before Rachel or Grant arrived, Denise, alone with my mother, preparing an injection. My mother, compliant, docile, her afternoons and evenings visibly slower and heavier than her early mornings, before the second dose. I found Grant on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks earlier, walking my mother through a stack of papers at the kitchen table, while she nodded along with the particular slow, agreeable rhythm of someone who is not truly following what she's agreeing to. I found the moment, time-stamped, unmistakable, where Grant slid a pen into her hand and guided it, gently, patiently, to a signature line. I found Rachel 2 days after that, sitting my mother down with a different folder, saying words the audio didn't quite catch, but the body language made unmistakable. Reassurance, patience, the practiced calm of someone repeating a script they'd used before. I traced the wire transfers next. $61,000 from the second mortgage, moved within 11 days into 3 separate cryptocurrency exchange accounts, all registered under Grant's name, all showing catastrophic, uninterrupted losses over the preceding 6 months. The unmistakable signature of a man trying to trade his way out of a hole he'd already dug too deep to climb out of honestly. I traced the login activity on those exchange accounts back to 2 IP addresses, using the same open-source technique I'd used to geolocate a suspicious access attempt on a classified network, cross-referencing login timestamps against public IP registries, then narrowing the physical location down through nothing more exotic than a business directory search. One address was Grant's home office. The other, used at odd hours, late at night, resolved to a co-working space 40 minutes away that I would later learn Grant had been renting under a different LLC, a company whose only listed activity was managing consulting services that didn't appear to consult with anyone. There was a night, somewhere in the middle of that week, when I sat alone in my father's old study with 3 laptops worth of financial statements open in front of me, and I stopped being an intelligence officer for about 10 minutes and just became a daughter who wanted badly to be wrong. I called Marcus at close to 1 a.m. "Tell me if I'm building a case out of nothing," I said. "Tell me if I'm the one who's lost perspective here, not them." He was quiet for a moment. "Read me the transfer amounts again, the dates." I did. "Emily," he said, "a coincidence happens once, maybe twice if you're generous. You have an unlicensed felon administering unauthorized sedatives on a schedule that lines up with every document signature. You have a second insurance policy nobody disclosed. You have wire transfers into a losing crypto account within days of a mortgage draw. That's not a family making some questionable decisions under financial stress. That's a pattern. You know what a pattern looks like. You've built hundreds of them. Don't talk yourself out of the one you're not allowed to look away from just because it hurts more than the others." I didn't cry. Not then. I wrote his words down instead, in the same notebook where I'd been logging timestamps and account numbers, because some part of me needed to see them on paper to believe them. And I found my father's life insurance policy, not the one that had already paid out 2 years earlier, a second policy, one I hadn't known existed, taken out on my mother's life 8 months ago, with Rachel and Grant listed as primary beneficiaries. The premium payments drafted automatically from an account my mother could no longer independently access. When Rachel called it insurance updates over the phone a few days later, because of course she called once she realized I wasn't going away, I understood exactly what she meant, and exactly how much she was hoping I wouldn't ask what kind of policy, on whose life, benefiting whom. "You have no right to go through Mom's private information," Rachel said, when I finally sat down with her, in person, at a diner 2 miles from the house. The folder closed on the table between us like an unexploded shell. "I have every right," I said. "I'm her daughter, and her financial power of attorney predates whatever Grant had her sign 8 months ago. You're twisting everything. Mom's care is expensive. You have no idea what it costs to keep someone in their own home instead of a facility. We were trying to help her. You hired an unlicensed felon to inject her with sedatives every morning." Rachel's face went white, then red. "Denise is a professional caregiver. Denise's real name is Denise Alcott. She lost her nursing license 7 years ago for stealing from an elderly patient in a facility 2 states away. I have the court records." The silence. The kind of silence that isn't confusion. It's the silence of someone doing rapid arithmetic on how much I actually know. "You didn't do a background check," I said. "Or you did, and you hired her anyway. Because a woman with a revoked license and priors for elder theft doesn't ask a lot of questions about being paid in cash to keep an old woman quiet and compliant while you get her to sign things." "That's not—" "Grant found her. Grant handled the medical stuff. Grant put a needle in our mother's arm." She's not being hurt, Emily. She's being medicated. There's a difference. She told me it feels like watching her own life through water. That's not medication for anxiety, Rachel. That's how you keep someone from asking questions about a second mortgage and a life insurance policy she never applied for. My sister's eyes filled, and for one terrible second, I almost softened. Because some part of me, the part that had watched her hold my hand at our father's funeral, the part that remembered her teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway of that house, wanted this to be a misunderstanding I could still forgive my way out of. Then she said the thing that closed that door for good. You don't understand what it's like, being the one who's actually here. You get to fly off to your important job and feel like the hero every time you show up for 3 days. Grant and I are the ones dealing with her every single day. And yes, we made some financial decisions to keep this family afloat, but we would have paid it back. We were going to fix it before you ever had to know. Fix it? I repeated, by taking her to sign a second mortgage. Rachel's face changed, a single fatal beat too slow. What second mortgage? I hadn't mentioned one. Rachel had just confirmed there was a second one coming. When, I said quietly, is the appointment? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I already knew from the appraisal request that a bank visit was scheduled, and I had less than 4 days to make sure I was standing in that lobby before my mother signed anything else. I called Marcus Webb that night and told him everything. The footage, the wire transfers, the fake medical license, Denise's real identity and record, the scheduled second mortgage appointment. I heard him go quiet on the other end of the line, the way people do when a case stops being theoretical. This is enough to move on, he said. Elder financial exploitation, unauthorized practice of medicine, wire fraud, and depending on how that second insurance policy was structured, potentially conspiracy to commit fraud against a federally insured institution. I'm bringing in our elder justice unit. We'll coordinate with local adult protective services so your mother has an advocate in the room who isn't family, and we time this to the bank appointment. If they're going to walk her in to sign, we want to be there when the ink would otherwise hit the paper. Clean, documented, in front of witnesses who can't be gaslit later. How did they even get my name on it? I asked. The loan? My social security number without my signature? A notary who'll sign anything for cash, Marcus said. We've seen it before. It's the easiest part of the whole scheme to prove, and usually the first thing that falls apart in court. I want to be there too. You will be. But Emily, when this happens, you don't say a word until we tell you to. Let the evidence do the talking. You've already built the case. Don't let your sister turn this into a family argument in front of federal agents. Let it be exactly what it is. I understood what he meant. For 11 years, I had built my career on the idea that the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It needs to be documented, timed, and delivered at the moment it can't be denied. I spent the next 3 days finishing that documentation. I got a formal medical evaluation for my mother, a toxicology screen that confirmed sedative levels in her system consistent with regular, unsupervised administration. Proof, in a language no one could argue with, of exactly what had been done to her. I got sworn statements from Patricia Newen outlining the irregularities in the power of attorney paperwork Grant had walked my mother through. Statements I would later learn matched almost exactly the pattern Denise Foss, Alcott, had used in her previous conviction 2 states away. Same script. Same soft voice. Same syringe. I sat with my mother each evening while the fog lifted a little more, day by day, as I quietly stopped Denise's visits under the excuse that I was helping out while I was in town. My mother's sentences got longer. Her eyes came back into focus. She started asking, on the 3rd night, with something like her old sharpness returning to her voice, "Emily, why does the room feel so much clearer today?" I didn't tell her everything yet. Karen's advice through Patricia had been the same as Marcus's. Don't destabilize the case by tipping off the people orchestrating it, even accidentally, even with love. I just said, because I stopped letting anyone give you anything I didn't check myself, Mom. From now on, that's the rule. She reached over and took my hand, the way she used to when I was small and scared of thunderstorms. "You sound like your father," she said. "He never trusted a form he hadn't read twice." "Good," I said, "because I read everything 3 times. The morning of the bank appointment, I was in the parking lot 40 minutes early, sitting in a car with 2 federal agents I'd never met 12 hours earlier and a folder thick enough to need a rubber band around it. Marcus arrived with a local adult protective services caseworker, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Loretta, who had clearly done this before and would not be rattled by whatever happened in that lobby. I watched Grant's SUV pull in at 9:52. Rachel got out first, walked around to the passenger side, and helped my mother out of the back seat with the practiced, gentle-looking care of someone who has learned exactly how to look devoted while doing something monstrous. My mother moved slowly, unsteadily, not because of her age, I now understood, but because Denise had given her a dose that morning before I'd been able to intercept it, a small mercy of timing that turned out, in the end, not to matter, because it became one more piece of evidence. I let them get inside first. I let Grant set my mother down at the loan officer's desk. I let him slide a pen toward her hand, exactly the way I'd watched him do it on 91 days of security footage. Then I walked in, with Marcus and his partner behind me, with Loretta at my side, and I set the folder down on the desk between my mother's trembling hand and the signature line Grant was guiding it toward. "Mom," I said, "don't sign that." Rachel spun around so fast she knocked over the little cup of pens on the desk. "Emily, what are you—" "Mrs. Hart," Marcus said, stepping forward, badge already open in his hand, voice calm and level, in a way that filled the whole room without ever rising in volume. "My name is Special Agent Marcus Webb, FBI. This appointment is being paused pending a review of a pattern of financial exploitation and unauthorized medical administration involving your account." My mother looked at the badge, then at me, then at her own hand still holding the pen Grant had placed there, and something in her face cracked open. Not fear this time, but a terrible, dawning clarity. "Grant," Loretta said quietly, opening her own credentials, "I'm going to need you and Rachel to step away from the desk." "This is insane," Rachel said, her voice climbing towards something desperate. "She's our mother. We take care of her. Emily doesn't even live here. She flew in 3 weeks ago and suddenly she's an expert." "We have toxicology results," I said, and this was the one time I let myself speak, because Marcus had told me I could, once the badge was already on the table, and the moment could no longer be talked back. Showing sedative levels consistent with daily unsupervised administration by an unlicensed individual with a prior conviction for elder financial exploitation. We have 91 days of security footage. We have wire transfers from a second mortgage into cryptocurrency accounts under Grant's name. And we have a life insurance policy on Mom's life that neither of us knew existed until I traced it 8 days ago. Grant's face had gone the color of old paper. "You had no right," he started. "I had every right," I said. "I'm her daughter. And unlike the two of you, I never once asked her to sign anything I hadn't already read 3 times. Marcus's radio crackled once, low, at his hip. He glanced at it, then at me, and gave the smallest nod. A second team, positioned 20 minutes away at Denise's rented apartment, had just confirmed she wasn't home. She'd left early that morning for what her neighbor described as a new client out of state, which meant she was already moving on to the next family before this one had even finished falling apart. It would take 11 more days to catch her, but in that moment, standing in that lobby, I understood with total clarity that we hadn't just stopped one theft. We had stopped the middle of a pattern that had already repeated itself before and would have kept repeating, quietly, in daylight, in someone else's living room, if nobody had ever pulled the thread. The bank manager, who had gone very still behind the counter, quietly reached for his phone. My mother was crying now, but it wasn't the frightened, defeated crying I remembered from the recliner 3 weeks earlier. It was something closer to relief, the particular grief of someone finally allowed to stop pretending they hadn't noticed what was happening to them. "I knew something was wrong," she said, so quietly, only I heard it at first. "I kept thinking I was losing my mind." "You weren't losing your mind, Mom," I said, kneeling in front of her chair for the second time in 3 weeks, but this time in a bank lobby instead of a darkened living room. Someone was taking it from you, on purpose, a little bit every day. What happened over the following hour was, by design, almost anticlimactic.
There was no shouting, no handcuffs pulled dramatically across the lobby floor. Marcus's team took statements. Loretta arranged for my mother to be evaluated immediately by an independent physician, off the record of any Dr. Grant or Denise had touched. Rachel was asked calmly to come in for a formal interview later that week. Grant was informed that a federal warrant was already being sought for the arrest of Denise Alcott, using the real name on file with her revoked license, and that his own financial accounts were now subject to a forensic audit that would, over the following months, unravel exactly how much of my mother's money had disappeared into failed crypto trades and the Shell LLC renting a co-working space 40 minutes from her house. Denise was arrested 11 days later, in another state, attempting the same scheme with a different family under yet another name.
That detail, when Marcus told me, was the moment I finally cried. Not for my own mother, who was safe by then, but for however many other Margaret Harts had already been sitting in their own darkened living rooms, watching their lives through water, believing they were simply getting old. I didn't get the rest of it all at once. It came to me the way it comes after a case closes, in pieces, over phone calls weeks apart, a lawyer's email here, a court date there. A legal process that followed took the better part of a year.
Grant was charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Rachel, after months of insisting she didn't know how bad it had gotten, ultimately accepted a plea agreement that required full restitution, supervised probation, and a permanent bar from ever again serving as a fiduciary or power of attorney for a vulnerable adult. Denise Alcott received the longest sentence of the three, her third conviction for the same pattern of crime finally catching up with a system that had let her slip through twice before. The second mortgage was never signed. The insurance policy was voided and investigated as fraudulent from its origin. My mother's house, my father's porch, the maple tree he planted, stayed exactly what it had always been supposed to be, hers, free and clear, for as long as she wanted to live in it. Rachel came to the house once, near the end of that year, after her plea agreement was finalized and her restitution schedule had been set. She stood on the porch for a long time before she knocked, long enough that I watched her through the window, deciding whether to lose her nerve. I let her in. My mother was at the kitchen table, and for a moment, nobody said anything at all. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't know how bad it got," Rachel said finally, her voice raw in a way I hadn't heard from her since we were kids. I told myself Grant had it handled. I told myself Denise was helping. I told myself 100 small lies, because the big truth was too heavy to carry, and it was easier to let someone else carry it, even if that someone was Mom. "You let a stranger drug her," I said, every morning, for months. I know. She was crying now, without the performance I remembered from the diner. I don't have anything that makes that okay. I'm not here for that. I'm here because I owe her an apology I should have given a long time before any of this happened, and because I owe you one too, for making you the only person in this family who was still paying attention. My mother looked at her for a long moment. "You hurt me," she said quietly. "Not just the money. You made me feel like I was losing my mind. That was the part I can't forget." "I know," Rachel said again, and it was the only thing she had left to say that was true. My mother didn't forgive her that afternoon. She didn't say she never would either. She simply nodded, the way you nod at a fact you're still learning to hold, and said, "You can come back. Slowly. We'll see. Boundaries first. Trust second. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would come last of all. It has to be earned one visit at a time, the way real repair always is." I want to tell you that I felt triumphant, standing in that bank lobby. I didn't. I felt the particular hollow exhaustion of someone who has just finished defusing something that should never have been armed in the first place. Revenge, if that's even the right word for what I was after, was never the goal. I didn't want to destroy my sister. I wanted my mother to stop disappearing a little more every single day, behind a fog someone else had decided to keep her in. 6 months later, I drove back to that house on a Sunday afternoon, with no folder in my hand and no case left to build. My mother was in the kitchen, steady on her feet, sharp-eyed, arguing with a jar of peach preserves, the same way she used to before any of this began.
"You're supposed to ask for help before attacking the jar," I told her. "I've been opening jars longer than you've been alive," she said, and won. We sat on the porch that evening, the one my father built with his own hands, and for a long time, neither of us said anything. The maple tree had grown wide enough to shade the whole yard now. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower droned on, and the air smelled like cut grass and the particular gold light of a late Sunday afternoon. And my mother looked, for the first time in a long time, entirely like herself. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't found that spreadsheet," she said. "I try not to think about it. I want you to know something, Emily." She turned to look at me, her eyes clear and steady in a way I would have given almost anything to see again 3 weeks earlier. I spent 2 years believing I was simply getting old, getting forgetful, getting like your grandmother was, near the end. I had almost made peace with disappearing a little more every year, because everyone around me kept telling me that was normal, that was just what happens. I didn't know it was being done to me on purpose. I don't know if I ever would have known if you haven't come home. "You would have," I said. "Eventually. Somehow. Maybe," she said. "But I didn't have to find out the hard way, because you didn't wait to be sure. You came the moment you had a reason to worry, and you kept coming back until you had proof instead of just a feeling." That's not something everyone does, even when they love someone. Rachel and I are not where we used to be. Trust doesn't come back on its own timeline just because a court case ends. My mother sees her, under supervision, at family gatherings that are still careful, still a little cautious around the edges. Forgiveness, if it comes, will come slowly, the way real healing always does, not in a single dramatic scene, but in 100 small, honest ones. What I carry with me now, back at my desk on base, reviewing patterns that have nothing to do with my own family, is this: the people trained to spot deception for a living are not immune to missing it in the people they love most. I almost didn't look closely enough. I almost let a busy career and a difficult time zone excuse me from asking the uncomfortable questions a little sooner. I got lucky. My mother is alive and clear-eyed and arguing with jars of preserves again. Not every family gets that ending. Elder financial exploitation happens quietly, in daylight, inside houses that look completely normal from the street, carried out by people who know exactly how to sound like they're helping. If someone in your life has started sounding a little too tired in the afternoons, a little too willing to let someone else handle the paperwork, a little too foggy about numbers that used to come easily to them, don't assume it's simply age. Ask the uncomfortable question. Check the accounts. Read the forms 3 times. Make the call before you get one you can't undo. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, share it with them today. And if stories about family, courage, and standing up for the people who can no longer stand up for themselves mean something to you, stay with us and subscribe. Because sometimes the people who need saving the most are the ones who have already stopped asking to be.